My name is Allison Gutterman, and I am the president and CEO of Jelmar, LLC.
Arthur Gutterman, and I'm not finished yet.
My name is Uncle Steve, Stephen Gutterman. I retired in 1996. And I do want the whole world to know that I am still 22 and a half years later. I'm still waiting for my retirement watch.
Well, my father was the kind of character that he could look you in the eye, call you a son of a, and he thought you were being complimented.
He was a character right out of Damon Runyon. He was rough and tough, never graduated, never went to high school, yet graduated from high school, and he was a born salesman.
My grandfather was a really ethical guy. He told it like he saw it. He was honest, maybe to a fault. There were certainly stories about my grandfather that traveled 20 years after he had stopped working in the business. He was definitely very well respected, even from stories that I had heard about him.
He could smooth talk you out of your pants. You know, I'll never forget, I was on a trip with him. We were coming home, driving from Iowa back to Chicago, and we're at Pontiac, Illinois, and he says, "There's the prison, Pontiac prison." I said, "Great." He says, "You know, I could stop there and visit some of my friends." I looked at him, he said, "Yeah." Well, the neighborhood he grew up at, that was not uncommon. They were rough and tumble days in the early 20s, and guy would go out and hold up a gas station and then take his mother out for dinner. They always treated their parents well.
I went down to Eckerd Drug in Clearwater, Florida with my father, and we were seeing the buyer. His name is Jack Fleming, and had a desk messier than my brother ever kept his desk, or my father ever kept his desk. We're sitting there talking, making a pitch. My father stands up to make a point and goes like this, and every paper on his desk flew onto the floor.
When we first came out with Tarnix, we were in Washington, D.C. with People's Drug, and we're demonstrating doing the penny. It's my father and myself. We dipped the penny, came out, and the penny dripped onto the desktop, and we had to refinish the desk. A great deal of my success is due not only to the circumstances with my father. My brother was a tremendous help in building the business to where it is.
Whenever I think about my Uncle Steve working in the business, I always think of those blue books and him poring over them and analyzing our advertising dollars to make sure that we were spending it in the right way. So Steve and advertising kind of go hand in hand.
And it wouldn't be there without his aid and his help and his knowledge.
Arthur and I were partners for 33, 34 years. It seems like 70 or 80, but it was a good run.
And none of this I don't think would be possible for me if it wasn't for my late wife, because her taking care of the family enabled me to do what I did.
She was a really important supporter of me at Jelmar, but also she was a great support for my father. She was certainly somebody that gave him a tremendous amount of business advice. She was really a brilliant businesswoman in her own right, and helped Jelmar build itself to what it is today.
I took after my father more than my brother. I was very happy at a certain point of the business where it was very successful, and I saw a lot of reasons not to change. Arthur, on the other hand, wanted to build the business and do more with it.
And I'm proud to say that we have now the third generation of Guttermans running the company. Her mother said to me, "You know, Allison wants to go to work for you." And I said, "That's the first I heard of it."
And from that, she really advocated for me with my dad and said, "Hey, you should really think about hiring Allison." My dad actually did end up offering me a job. We met and had breakfast one day, and my father said, "Well, you know, you can come and work at the company, and if you hate your job, you can quit. And if you're not great at your job, I'll fire you, but you'll always be my daughter first." So if it wasn't for my mom, I certainly wouldn't be working here. And her support over the years really impacted me throughout my entire career. You know, even on the first day, he didn't even take me out to lunch. Literally, I was sitting in my office, and my father, our vice president of sales, and my uncle walked out and left me on the first day. We certainly don't do that for our employees. We make sure that they are, they feel part of the Jelmar team. I did not feel like part of the Jelmar team the first day I started.
To this day, never let me forget that she had an office with no windows. And when I went out to lunch that day, I didn't invite her to join us.
I walked in with a lot of bravado. So I walked into my dad's office and I said, "Well, what is the training protocol? What do you want me to do?" And my father looked at me kind of like I had things coming out of my head. He hadn't thought about, once he had hired me, really what he wanted me to do. I had a table and a chair, and my father said, "Okay, well, I don't know what you're supposed to do. Go and read customer service letters." And so that's what I did.
But I do know that for the first couple of years that she worked for us, I used to tell my late wife, "If I die before you put a bit in the paper, sell the company."
Well, I do remember my first sales call. One of my responsibilities is to figure out why our sales were up and look at it from a data perspective versus just a story perspective. So as we were walking across the street to one of our largest accounts, my vice president at the time said, "Well, you know the data better than anybody else. Why don't you just call in the account?" And it was one of the largest national accounts that is still in this country today. And I didn't really know what I was doing, but I guess I had to call on them because he asked me to call on them. So, you know, it was one of those do or die situations. I've had situations where during a sales call there was a fire drill that went off, so we actually had to go into the stairwell. Well, you know, I don't want to miss the opportunity to call on a buyer, so I continued my sales pitch right in the stairwell.
In her younger days, if I could have kept her on the road for 35 weeks a year, we wouldn't have needed any other salespeople. She's that good.
Well, I have to say that I'm really blessed that I can call my father my dad, my mentor, my business partner, and my friend. And it's taken me a long time to be able to define him in all those different roles. But I think that our relationship is extraordinarily unique, that I can define him in all those roles and see him in all those different kinds of roles. It's truly a blessing to be able to work in a family-owned business and to be able to have that relationship and that mentorship.
We were always a close family.
But he still drives Allison crazy.
Well, that's the father's job.
Well, that's true.
That is true, that it is certainly a father's prerogative to drive their children crazy, and it is no different in a family-owned business. I have always said, especially in my younger years when my father was working here full-time, 50% of the time my father's the best father and the worst boss, and the other 50% of the time he's the best boss and the worst father. But never at the same time is he the best father and the best boss. It would just be statistically impossible for those things to happen ever at the same time.
My father started out opening his own rep business, manufacturer's rep business, in 1947 He was a relatively successful rep in those days. We sold promotions to retailers as again selling them lines of merchandise. I joined him in September of 1958. For the first couple of years, it was just learning how to be a peddler. A few years after I joined the company, my brother Steve joined it. We had a lot of 2-transistor radios that we couldn't get rid of. And my father used to be friendly with a gentleman named Al Eichhoff, who was in advertising. And Al said, let me try to put these on the radio in those days. So we started advertising that, and we sold out. And then we ended up probably buying every 2-transistor radio that an importer had. We got rid of those. We were moderately successful. Al was just starting out with his own agency and was struggling. We started a little company called Bargain Sales. Bargain Sales' first item was 100 combs for $1, which we sold again on radio. And then that led to another item that we sold was a bucket of screws or a bucket of buttons. Again, well, those are a little more money. I think those are $3 at retail. Al came into our office and he said, the first time on TV was the hair trimmer.
If you're not a barber, you need a hair whiz, the foolproof hair cutting instrument.
Which again was another company that Al was doing the advertising for and went bankrupt. We had to sell that to another organization, the Grant Company. We couldn't afford to sell the product and finance our retailers because they wouldn't pay us until after they sold the goods. And that item led us into a second item called the Dexter Hammer and Stitcher.
You're watching the Dexter Hammer and Stitcher, one of the most useful and versatile appliances to come along in years.
Which the first year we had it in Chicago at Christmas, Walgreens in Chicago alone sold 500,000 units. And I had their store managers coming to my house in the evening to pick up product. And then from that item came Tarnix. In 1966, Al came into our office and he said, a guy went bankrupt on him, and would we help him take over the inventory and do stuff with them? So we took a look at the item and we said, okay, but I feel it was called Magic Tarnish Remover or something. We changed the name to Tarnix, put it on the air in 1967.
Remember when cleaning your silver meant hours of hard work, rubbing and scrubbing until your hands were raw? Well, ladies, those days are gone forever. Now there's an amazing product called Tarnix.
It's been on the air continuously. And in the early years, when we had Tarnix, we would ship it into an account in October, run the TV, get the product back in January or February, and then reship it to them again in April for an Easter and Mother's Day promotion. And after about 20 years of that, it became a standard everyday item in the stores. And it was one of our first and most successful items.
So when my grandfather started all of his rep agencies, he would name the companies after different people in our families, and he would combine all of them.
And we picked a name that had no meaning at all because we didn't want a name that would limit us to what kind of products we could have on the market.
There was a company called ArtsDev. There was a company which was my father Arthur and Stephen. There was a company called Doman Products, which was my grandfather and my grandmother Dorothy and my grandfather Manny.
So by having a name that didn't mean anything, we could say, I have a niece named Judy, so the J was for Judy. Or at that time, I could have said something else. The E was for Eichhoff.
My grandfather very distinctly told me that the name of Jelmar was named after his first 3 granddaughters.
The E could have been for Emily, my late wife. The L could have been for my niece Lori. The M could have been for my father Manny. It could have, the A could have been for Arthur. The R could have been for Robert, which is my brother's middle name. You could do anything you want with those letters.
Judy, Laura, and Marcia, which to me makes complete sense, because if you sound out Jelmar, it sounds like Judy, Laura, L, and Marcia for Marcia. So that's where I remember my grandfather telling me that Jelmar came from. I know that there's been a lot of other people in the family that have different ideas, but that's the memory that I remember my grandfather telling me.
We wanted a name that had no meaning. I'd like to see the company continue its growth path. I think the team that Allison has put together is extremely capable.
I certainly don't have the knowledge in every aspect of running an organization, but I think part of being a great CEO or a good CEO is knowing where you're lacking and making sure that you hire to where your deficits are.
And I think that they have nothing but good times ahead. And as long as they continue to treat people well and come up with products that people will need, want, like, I think there's a bright future.
This year, for the first time, we have a 4th generation. My niece is an intern in our company, and what's been great for me is that I actually see from my father's perspective how wonderful it is to have somebody that is from a different generation come in and work in the business. And my children now see how exciting it is to work in the family business, which is wonderful for me to see that they're engaging with their cousin in a different way. So who knows what is the future of Jelmar? It might be another generation. So that's really exciting to me to see that Jelmar could live on to even a 4th generation.
Who knows, maybe my grandchildren will be the next leaders of the company, which would be a dream, but we'll see.